Well, for our next interviewee on Breaking Lines, we are delighted to be joined by John Percy, journalist extraordinaire, and with 15,000 plus articles that I could find and research for this podcast. John, do you think you've served your apprenticeship as a journalist yet and ready to step forward?
I think so, yeah. The Sorcerer's Apprentice is now ready to move on now. So, yeah, thank you for that, Dave. Thank you for that glorious introduction.
You've done a bit of magic. To be fair, John, you have done a bit of magic in your time, mate, and we'll probably come on to these. Might be the stories you can't tell.
Yeah.
No, look. I mean, where did it all start for you, John? I mean, look. Was it a passion for? We're sort of always keen to understand this. Was it a passion for football? Was it a passion for journalism? Was it a bit of both? Sort of where did the love for both things start for you?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. The only thing I was ever any good at school was English and languages, which my teachers may, if they ever saw this, disagree. But that was the only thing I was ever interested in. I was academically awful, like a lot of journalists you'll come across. School wasn't something they look back on fondly. I was too busy messing around, trying to make people laugh, being smart with the teachers, but and playing football obviously as well, as much as I could. And then obviously you get into football, actually going there. I'll get onto that soon about when I first started going. And then in the 90s, there was a lot of fanzines started to come around, like, fanzines writing about the clubs. And it was always a really interesting way of writing. And obviously newspapers back then were very different to how, unfortunately, they are now. The newspaper in Nottingham, where I grew up, was this massive broadsheet called the Nottingham Evening Post. And, you get 3 editions of it a day. It would land on your doormat and you would read it. You'd read every bit of it. No one knew what the internet would have been in those days. So it was like the newspaper
hadn't been invented, really.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, that's what I did that bit, yeah. But that's what I was trying to say. The newspapers was obviously, the newspaper was the information of record where you would go to for your information. Obviously, as a sports fan, you would go to the back page and it would be Forest, Notts County, Mansfield, obviously Notts cricket as well. So, it would all be there. And that would be your information. There wouldn't be club websites detailing where a new signing or anything like that. So all your information is from the newspapers and fanzines as well, with the sort of different way of looking at clubs. They'd be more critical, wouldn't they? Because they've, access in those days wasn't a thing. So they could say what they liked about Johnny Briggs, the star player. So then obviously it moved on to, I need to do something here. Is it writing and football? If you can combine the two, beautiful. And I got a work experience position at the Post in 98, which is obviously a long time ago, and then basically worked my way up from there. But, this is, it's been a long road. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I did a course at Derby Uni a couple of years ago, and they're obviously asking, how do you get into it? And you can't mess about. I mean, it's a tough road. I mean, we're not saving lives or anything, but it's not something you can just click your fingers and become a journalist. You have to do the hard yards, like you guys. I'm sure, you can't just click your fingers and you walk into that job.
Do you think that's changed, John? Because like you said, back, I'm thinking back when you were saying that, it was like the Saturday evening, wasn't it? Even like the local paper would come out with the results, wouldn't it? And literally you had to buy it to find out what the results were through the Football League, or you'd sit and watch the teletext or whatever it was. Yeah. But do you think it was so much harder? It must have been so much harder then, like for all of us, to get into football and make a living out of whatever that field within football was. But because there were fewer jobs and, there were fewer outlets to share the news, do you think those hard yards must serve you well, I think, when you finally break through, don't they?
Yeah. But I mean, obviously, in those days, there'd have been a reporter for each club, and then there'd been another reporter, maybe one or two doing the other jobs. But there was also exams in those days as well. I mean, I don't know if it's easier now or harder, but I mean, that's why I never really progressed at the Evening Post, because I was useless at shorthand, the old Wrigley writing. You have to get 100 words a minute. And I was awful at exams at school, and that obviously went on into adult life. When the pressure's on, I shit myself, basically. I couldn't do the exam situation. I would just freeze up. And there was a law exam I think I really struggled to get. So I think I got to a position at the Post where they said you can't go any further because you until you get these exams. So the dream of becoming the forest reporter down the road, not until you got these exams. And that was when your old mate Paul Mace came in 2001, and I was off to Leicester City.
Oh, nice. Macey headhunted you, did he?
Well, I wouldn't say headhunted me, but he offered me the job and I took it. Yeah,
Right.
he may well have
him
headhunted
ever
me. He'll
since.
deny it now, though. Yeah,
He'd done some good things in his time then.
yeah, some good thing. Yeah, yeah. Which conveniently brings me on to how we first met, Gary. I've got to tell you this story, Dave. You'll love this one. So I've gone in at Leicester, 2001. Peter Taylor in charge. It's obviously a completely different experience to covering football clubs as a reporter. You know, the access you get is obviously incredible. You know, you can see any player you like. You know, you get access to the canteen and everything. So it's all like this great new job, this great new mood. And the first game of the season comes along and it's Bolton at home. Now,
Why did you have to
face
mention
tells it
this?
all. I think
I'm leaving.
if memory serves, Bolton had just been promoted under Big Sam.
That's right, yeah.
And it was basically 5-0, and I'm sure Gary will back this up that it could have been 15. It was, and I'm sitting there, new job, thinking, God, is it always like this? And then after the game, the mood around the place, and this is where I got my first sort of insight into how it's working at football clubs like you guys have all your senior career. It basically, the whole mood of the club is ruined for a week. It's like a dark cloud hangs over it. And, you know, you've got the financial people, you know, worried about, you know, will this affect the attendance in the next game? There's all these things that you don't take into account as a reporter, that it all goes into the mix at a football club. And I remember after that game, the 5-0, Macy said, you know, we've got to batten down the hatches. It was basically a call to arms, really. We've got to basically behave ourselves this week. All the scrutiny is going to be on us. The manager's going to get a lot of sticks. I think, was it the season before, Gary, lost in the FA Cup? Was it Wickham or...
Do you know what? You're meant to be bringing some positivity.
I'm really sorry
to this podcast.
No, don't worry, we'll get there.
No, you're right. You're right. No,
obviously, and there was an overspill into the season.
Yeah, I remember. It was funny actually, because I remember us going in that pre-season. I remember them going in for the bonuses to sort the bonuses out, and there was. I think we'd signed Ian Walker, Wisey, and one or two others, and we'd finished the previous season really badly. Yeah, Scully. Yeah, so I have got a story about Scully in a minute, which I will tell just on the back of this. And and basically, I can remember them going in saying, like, let's put everything on like the top six. And I'm sat there going, top six. We struggled at the end of last season, and of course, and everything was positive, like it often is pre-season. Like, you know, all throughout the country now, every club's going to be positive as anything, aren't they? And then it was, like you say, it was the first game, and it was at home, and it was a home, Dave. So it was the first game at home, and we got absolutely spanked. And I'll be honest with you, I sat there and I thought, we're in trouble. You know, one of those when you're in trouble.
One game in,
you could feel it. But you're right in what you're saying, John, because the job of the media then would have been so important, wouldn't it? Because it would have been right. We need to make sure that this doesn't get too big, or we need to try and manage this. And actually, when you're in those moments, sometimes it's the media guys that can calm things down. That's where you need really good media people, don't you? Because they can calm things down.
This is where it comes into about you, Gary, because obviously Paul's a very good operator. You know, Leicester's media operators were way ahead of the time at that time. And I remember he said, I think none of the players had spoken after the game. It was like basically a blanket ban. You know, let's just get out of here. Let's just try and draw a line under it. And I think 2 days later, Paul called me and he just said, go and have a word at the training ground with Gary, because he's a safe pair of hands. He'll say the right things. And that was the first time we met. I went down to the training ground. It was basically, can you reflect on? And obviously, as club media, I'm not going to say, oh, you know, the right back played awful. You know, it's just going to be a soft soap. How do you feel about that? And I remember that was basically an introduction into how a club would handle a crisis, because it basically was, wasn't it, Gary, at the time?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it'd have been a tough period. Yeah, my Scully one, just on the back of that, my Scully was, remember how the training ground was on like little levels at Beaver Drive. So this one morning, James Scowcroft, I don't think he'd signed that long. And anyway, I'm pretty sure it was Scully. Anyway, he's got out of his car, he's parked on one of the levels, and he's walked down the steps into a training ground. And as he's turned round, he's obviously forgot to put his handbrake on, and his car's rolled off the top tier, honestly, and it's gone down the tier, and I think it's hit the manager's car. And I can remember all the lads ruthless, isn't it, at the football club? All the lads have got round the seat straight into the girls' office. CCTV, let's have a look at it.
Who is it?
Oh, mate, honestly, it was brilliant. It was
that why he didn't play for the first 10 games?
That's probably why he didn't. Yeah, there's a few others must have rolled it into the cards as well. So when you go back to when you go back to working as club media, that must be, a good start and very different. But I suppose, did you come to a point doing club media where it was kind of like, I maybe want to be a little bit broader, or maybe want to have a little bit more chance to cover more stories?
Absolutely, and obviously it was a really bad season there, and it was relegation. And he will speak to anyone in club media when a club is in a relegation battle. No players want to speak. It's like there's trying to find a positive when you're bottom of the league, or third bottom and you had 4 wins. No one wants to talk, and you've got to do the club program. You've got to do everything around trying to keep things positive, and you can't fool the fans for that long. So towards the end of that season, obviously the club went into administration the year after, and I left after that. And that's when I became a freelance with a local agency, an agency called Wardles, based in Manchester, and I was there for sort of 8-9 years. But that's basically where that was my grounding as a journalist, because the Post was very, very basic sort of stuff. But becoming a freelance, covering all these clubs, dare I say it, building up contacts, agents, players, even like managers. That was the grounding for me. And obviously, from a work point of view, because you're a freelance, you sometimes be at games on a Tuesday night. There's a 93rd minute winner, and you've got to do reports for the Mirror, the Daily Express, the Star, the Times, and the Telegraph. I tell you, that is the ultimate grounding. 93 minutes, 2-1. The whole complexion of the match reports changed. That's panic. I tell you, that is real panic.
So is that a change then? Obviously, John, you've gone from club-based media, which is, I suppose, in some ways, a lot of the time it's propaganda, isn't it?
It has changed now. I would say it's got a bit more.
Yeah.
It's got a bit more active now with making it real. Yeah.
But you go into that freelance world, and now is it now about the effectiveness of the writing? Is it about the headlines? Is it about scoops? How does that change then from the club-based media, and then you're coming into that other world? It's almost like moving into a different role, yet in the same genre, isn't it?
I think if we're all being honest, it always goes back to the scoops. I think people always want to know things they don't know. Whether it's stuff that's about the new signing, whether it's a manager under pressure, whether it's a club getting taken over, anything that you can find that's information to people, I think is what people. When you get into a taxi and you say you're a journalist, they say, who are we signing? I'm a Man United fan, or don't know. But there you go. So it's that sort of thing. But I think now, I've said this to Gary a lot of times over the years, I think journalism now is shifting towards more analytical things, where I think the fans want to know about it. Like the fans want to know how the club is being run on a daily basis, the way the planning goes into games. The stuff you do, Dave. I think there's so much more interest in that nowadays. From people want to know all the psychological sort of side of it, the sports science, tactical sort of side of it. And I think also people want to know where the money's going as well. Fans have got this real funny thing now where if a transfer is being spent, they're like, oh, God, can't believe we spent $5 million on him. It's like, it's not your money, lads. But they're obsessed with how much money the club spends and if it's being spent in the right way. But so I think football journalism now is much broader on the sort of analytical, sort of tactical side, which is good because it allows you to vary your writing a little bit. But like I say, I think it always goes back to scoops and providing information people can't ordinarily get.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, John, because we've often had it over the years where the fans will shout at players that we pay your wages, and all I can say now is we've got some very affluent fans if they're still throwing that about.
We used to do that. Yeah, we used to do that though, Dave, when you were shanking a clearance into the stand as well. Unfortunately, so yeah.
Well, we don't want to pay your wages.
Yeah, you're like, you're not paying very much, then, lads, are you? Yeah. So, blimey, some of the clubs I've been at.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, coming into the mix now, just finally, the PSR thing now at the Premier League level is another degree of fascination for fans now. I mean, there was obviously that PSR deadline on June the 30th for a few clubs like Newcastle, Villa, Forest. That was that was a weekend I've never known before. It was like Sky missed a trick, really, because they should have done the yellow ticker, because it was like a desperate weekend of mad business, of fans frantically, clubs trying to frantically, get players off the books to meet this, to comply with the rules. I mean, that's now been added into the mix. So you've almost got to have a bit of a degree in finance now as well. Which
I was going to say that to you, John, because you mentioned how, when you first started, kind of like, school academically wasn't your thing. Is that so now within your role, has that changed a little bit, having to understand the PSR and the implications of amortization and all of these words that go around? Has that been a challenge for you, or just challenge for anyone in the business?
Yeah, well, challenge for everyone, I imagine, especially me, who's academically poor. But I mean, amortization, the 3-year financial cycle, the sort of the limits that the clubs are working to, you're having to sort of swat up a lot on that, because obviously being on social media, if you make a slip up, there will be one accountant who's a fan on there who will poke holes in your argument, and you're like, right, okay, so you've got to have a basic, broad understanding of how it all works. And especially now, because it's such a big thing and it's so prevalent in football and seems to dictate everyone's sort of transfer windows now as well.
And as you go through that, John, like where does CPD and that additional learning come for you? Is that just kind of almost part of the journalistic skills of going away and getting information and learning how to use it? Or is there almost a place, is there additional, not even qualifications, but it's just somewhere you guys can go to kind of learn all about this stuff? Like you see a Kieran Maguire and people like that who are in a different space, talking about football finance, for your, not common and garden journalists, but how do journalists then go about upskilling themselves on some of this stuff, which is, let's be honest, it's highly technical, and you do have people who are specialists in it who even get it wrong.
You have to. I mean, I watch a lot of Kieran's stuff. I think he's been invaluable over the years, especially the last year, where he obviously knows his stuff, and he's got a very good way of making it sound, in layman's terms. So even someone like me can understand where it's going. But I mean, obviously the internet, you're just having to put amortization into Google, and it's actually Derby County where I first heard about amortization. Because if you remember, the first charge I think they got from the Football League, where I think they may have escaped action, but it was all about amortization, wasn't it? Do you remember? It was 2018 sort of time. That's the first time I ever came across the word, and it was over the contracts, the way they were doing them under Mel Morris. And it's obviously quite common now, but that word, I'd never heard of it until that time.
Yeah, I think a lot of clubs weren't they? But if a player was worth $6 million, I think they were, not necessarily Derby specifically, but a lot of clubs were doing it, weren't they? Where maybe spreading it out, or saying a player was still worth $6 million at the end of it, therefore your losses weren't as big. But so I think if we were to, it's funny really, because if we were to ask some of our listeners and say, right, we've got John Percy on, the first thing that most of them would say, I'm pretty sure, is, how the hell does he get these stories so quickly? Or how does he get these stories before other people? So give our listeners a bit of an insight of to sort of the work that has to go into getting stories quickly. Do you know what I mean? Of course, you said about building relationships up, but you must have to do a lot of work, a lot of background stuff, a lot of relationship building, to get these stories so quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about contacts, and I think there's that famous quote in Wall Street, I think, where he says the most valuable commodity I know is information, and that's how we journalists, I know it sounds a bit, haughty and everything, but that is how it works. It's basically whatever information you can get is valuable, however little, because it could be useful down the line. But contacts are always obviously the most important thing. Getting someone to tell you what's happening at a football club or with their player is the most crucial thing in this job. And if you've got those relationships, but the problem is it's always on to the next one. If you get a story that you're happy with, this job has a remarkable habit of 5 minutes later somebody else will get a story and you feel useless again. So it's always on to the next one. You never find that you can sort of, it's like, as a footballer playing an amazing 70-yard pass, you can't just think, right, it's me done for the game now. You've got to keep going. And that's just the same with journalism. There's always someone there, with another story that's going to, you think, I wish I got that one. So, you're on the phone all day. making calls, annoying people. That's the big thing I've always said about this job is the difficulty is keeping that balance between getting the information and getting on people's nerves, basically. You've got to have that balance where, they can take your call and not just think, oh, he's ringing again, which I'm sure they do, but that sort of thing. But and I've said the most difficult thing I think in this job is maintaining that relationship with people when things are going difficult. Now, the best example I can probably come up with is probably Brendan Rodgers at Leicester most recently. Obviously, the first 2 years at Leicester, fantastic. I think they won the FA Cup final. They desperately fell short of the Champions League places. But then towards the end, it's obviously going wrong. And my office, the Telegraph, when he got the sack, they want 1,000 words. How has it got wrong for Brendan Rodgers? Now, I have to obviously highlight how things, in my opinion, or by using fact, how it's gone wrong, whether it's bad players, bad decisions. And it's obviously difficult where, I don't know this for a fact, but Brendan will not, he will not like reading that. He'll think that it's a betrayal, because you've been so supportive in the past. But you have to sort of have that balance where you've got to eventually say, it has obviously gone wrong, and this is why. And it's just difficult to then say, go back to Brendan and then say, look, I was just doing my job, because it's, when you see it in black and white, it's different, isn't it? It's just, when you see it there being written, it's hard to see, isn't it, sometimes?
I think I think as a manager, I think obviously we've chatted, for a long time. We've known each other a long time, and there's times where I think you understand as a manager of a job that someone like you has to play. I think as long as it's always the same, isn't it? Nobody wants anything bad written about them. I don't care what anybody says. Nobody likes criticism. Yeah. Nobody wants it. We'd all be all three of us would be in the same position. However, I think at least if someone's doing it that's going to reason and is going to be fair, and balanced, that's a lot better than someone who's going to do it and just go for the, when you can tell someone's doing it and they're just putting it in there, they don't really know you, and you think that's pretty hurtful. Yeah. Like, I've got a family that might read that, or I've got,
exactly.
It's a very different scenario now, isn't it? In terms of how the information that people are given, how they do it, because we live in a world, don't we, where it feels like it's so much more popular to be really critical, and really
social media
controversial.
Contribute to that, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think even like X Factor shows like that, it's almost like a pile-on culture now, isn't it?
Yeah,
we're getting really deep here, lads.
I think so. I know. Well, just as a little pivot here, just because it's something I'm really keen to ask at the moment, and I don't want to. I'm conscious that these people are obviously in the public eye doing their job just like we're all trying to do. But when you've seen it recently with the Euros with Southgate, and this tournament felt to me. It's interesting. We spoke to Henry Winter about it, and Henry said actually he doesn't think it's any worse or any different to any other tournament that we've had, which was quite interesting. Went back to like the Beckham sort of time and the effigies and everything.
Sven, of course.
Yeah, but it feels to me a little bit, I don't know whether recently people for their own gains are just hitting a little bit harder, just to be a bit more controversial, to have a bit more clickbait. What's your thought generically over, say, the coverage on Southgate? Do you think it's got a bit heavy, or do you think it's just been normal in a journalism world?
I think social media has obviously ratcheted it up times 100, hasn't it? People are just going just that little bit too far with, your opinions. I mean, I tweeted something after the second game where I said that I thought Southgate was holding the players back, and I stand by that. It was nothing more offensive than that. But I think obviously everyone's trying to go that little bit further just to take it far. And the players do read it. I mean, you've seen the England players out there. They've said they're trying to block out the noise, but then you've had a couple of players like Alexander Arnold in the last few days have said, we all saw it, like the Gary Lineker podcast where he said the S word. They were all aware of it. So, I mean, the Southgate thing, I think it is possible to have the same opinion where you can think he did a great job and made, rebuilt England's reputation and image, but it was time for him to go. And I think, I do think he was holding players back. I mean, Declan Rice, for example, I think he's an absolutely tremendous player, but I didn't recognise him at the Euros. I just thought the job he was being asked to do, it was just so defensive that you were taking his qualities away. And I just think there were other players like even Bellingham, Grealish, I can't believe he didn't take him just for that little bit of something different. So, but I can recognise at the same time how much of a brilliant job he did. But it is possible to say as well, I think it was the right time for him to leave, because give someone else a go.
And I suppose that's one of the things and the joys of the sport, isn't it, John? That everybody's got an opinion, whether you're a fan or whether you're a highly experienced manager, all opinions are there to be aired. I suppose it's the difference between people who just want to have that pylon that you talked about and, make noise and create sensationalism for the sake of that versus something which is balanced and objective, maybe, that look, Southgate ends up being the most successful England manager outside of probably Alf Ramsey winning the World Cup because of his results, and okay, everybody will have an opinion on how he got the results, but fundamentally, whether it was an easy draw or a hard draw, that's not Gareth Southgate's fault. However, he gets them to 2 Euro finals, World Cup semi.
Yeah.
It's probably easier to be critical nowadays than it is sometimes to be on the other side of the fence and painting kind of the other side of the story, isn't it?
It's like Gary said as well, Gareth will have family, friends who were reading all the nasty stuff as well. And, I also think Gareth, the best achievement was, I think he made people like the England team again. I think there was a lot of sort of, pessimism about the team when he came in. I just think he rebuilt it. He was obviously a great leader on a lot of things, political sort of things as well. And I think what he did there was, just as important as the results almost, because he really made people want England to succeed again. But, it'd be interesting to see how they get next. Fancy it, Gary?
Oh, mate, listen, I was going to put in for it. But, I think the scrutiny on that job, if I'm being honest, I mean, when people start out, I remember people asking me, because at one point, I think there wasn't that many young English or British managers that would be seen as people to do the job. And I think at one point there was Daichi, there was Eddie Howe, and I think we were second in the league with Derby in the Championship. And actually, I think I was you were about fourth or fifth, sort of in line in terms of achievement, in terms of where you are. And people would ask me about it, and I'd just genuinely look and think, I just think it'd be such a proud moment, but I think the scrutiny on it, that role would make it really hard to enjoy. And I think there's part of any job, isn't there? We're also fortunate because we're doing something we love and we're doing something we're passionate about, and we've all got parts of the job you don't like and parts you really like. But I just think the England job would be such a difficult job to enjoy, or such a difficult job to do, and actually, maybe afterwards someone like Gareth could enjoy it or at least be proud of what he's done. But I think it would almost ruin your life a little bit. So I don't know who. It'd be interesting because I don't know how many managers. Wouldn't Eddie Howe throw away Newcastle at the moment? Look, if he had wind, but maybe that wasn't going to last long, possibly. But would someone like that throw away the opportunity in the Premier League to manage England? It'd be interesting. I think they're more likely to get someone who's coming towards the end of club career, like a Pep or something. I think those sort of options are realistic. So, but we should be asking you this question, John, because
what do you know, John?
Stuff recently
I was just going to say that we've been doing a column recently with Sven-Goran Eriksson, who's obviously sadly very unwell at the moment, and he was talking about the pressure he was under in 2002, 2006. I mean, if you remember, we had a very, very powerful and rampant tabloid media at the time. Do you remember there was a News of the World newspaper? He had the fake shake sting. I think his phone was hacked. I mean, these are the things he was dealing with. So it's always been there. And obviously, any affairs he had was plastered all over the papers. He lost his job because of that, basically, because of before the 2006 World Cup. So that pressure's always been there. I think even like going back to, Sir Bobby Robson, when I was a lad, I remember, the criticism was huge around those days. So I agree, Gary. It's a job. Where would the pride of getting it? Yeah. Once that wears off and you lose your first game to Albania away, it's just unbearable, isn't it?
That's how I envisage it, actually, John. Yeah, me as manager losing to Albania away. You imagine on the sideline.
Outside Albania now.
Yeah, I know. Well, they are. A lot of these sides are, aren't they?
No easy places to go, John.
No, exactly.
No. International football. I mean, I think they're overtaking Ireland in the rankings, haven't they?
Yeah, no,
Albania.
Okay,
Sorry,
controversy
Dave.
here on this episode.
Sorry, Dave. Just appointed a proud Irishman, I think, haven't they? So,
Yes, Ireland have appointed our first dentist into the role, so it's
yes,
good. But he's been successful.
absolutely, well, it'd be interesting, won't it? So, yeah, I mean, we're now sort of on the precipice of. I mean, first and foremost, what's this time of year like for someone like you, John? Because I imagine this is one of the busiest points, and how sort of do you get excited about the fact that the Premier League and the EFL's just round the corner? We're ready to start another new season, aren't we? So there's that feeling all the time of players signing. Someone's not signed anyone. This must be a really busy period for you.
Yeah, the transfer window is obviously the massive point for the fans. They want to know who they're signing, who they're selling, and obviously if you happen to write a story about a player who's the club's best players going somewhere, that's really on social media. That's the massive risk. If you get that one wrong, you're in big trouble. So that's when it goes back to those information and contacts being 100% right. If you get a player going from say Leeds to Chelsea and it's wrong, you won't forget about that one. But yeah, there's obviously excitement about the new season. There's always that little bit of trepidation over what the season will bring. Will the clubs that you cover more regularly do well? I mean, obviously one of the clubs I cover is Aston Villa, and that's just also happy at the moment. Also positive under Emery, and obviously they've got the Champions League. You've got Leicester who've come up again, and obviously there's the possibility of a points deduction there. Forest, as we know, never dull, really positive club on the up. They've signed some great players. There's always that sort of what happens next with them. And then obviously Wolves, they're a really well-run club now. There's them as well. And then there's obviously all the big clubs, like what will happen with Man United. I mean, I think Ten Hag, how long is that going to last? I'm sorry to be negative, but I just think you look at it, is it just a sticking plaster until they get the right person they want? How will Chelsea do under Maresca? There's all that excitement about what will happen. And then obviously the Championship, as you know, is best league in the world for unpredictability, isn't it? I mean, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? And then obviously you've got Birmingham in League One having a right go, haven't you? And Nigel as well has come up.
I tell you what, he's done a great job at Mansfield, hasn't he?
Brilliant. He's done more games than his dad. I found that out the other day.
Really?
He's managed more games than his dad. Yeah.
I think
that out the other day.
Do you know what I mean? Not just because I know him, but I think that and he's not one of them Nigers. He's not bothered about the sort of media side of it necessarily, and he doesn't big himself up. But no, and you admire that. But if you look at it, actually, the success he's had at most of the clubs he's been at, he's had a tremendous career. I think he's done a brilliant job.
Do you think his age goes against him, Gary? I hate to say it, but do you think his age goes against him? I mean, I think you just get the right man for the job, but would clubs look at him because they're going towards that model of, up and coming, even like early 30s? We look at Brighton, or do you think Nigel's probably a bit too old? Not that he should be judged by that.
Not necessarily. I think I agree with you. I think me and David discussed this quite a few times, that if you look at now, most clubs have a director of football. Most directors of football don't want to appoint a 50 or a 60-year-old manager necessarily that's been around the block and knows, a lot about the running of a football club and maybe the ins and outs of it. Whereas a lot of them want to, play a certain way, want to extol a view of a certain way. So therefore, you bring a first-time coach in, or you bring a young coach that's come through Man City or Ajax or whoever. And obviously, this is just part of the game evolving, isn't it? So I think Nige probably fits into a similar category in some ways to myself, where you're probably a bit more experienced. And actually, there's probably less jobs for it. I think Nigel's himself, he just doesn't pamper to trying to be somebody he's not, or big himself up. I suppose that's a challenge. So I suppose Midlands football, when you think about it, really this year is pretty strong. It's probably about as strong as it's been for a while, isn't it? In certain ways. So.
A lot of positivity around the teams, isn't it? Like as you described it there, John. Like you go across the whole.
A lot around Derby. They've come back from the abyss, haven't they? And they've rebuilt really strongly. All the backroom team now. The sporting intelligence, fantastic. And you're obviously now a part of that, Dave. It's just really exciting and an innovative way of doing it. So obviously, but then you've got your other clubs like West Brom and Norwich have made a really interesting appointment, haven't they? Hull have. I mean, the guy at Hull. I mean, you speak to some people in Germany about him, and he's like really ahead of his time. I mean, it's whether it works or not. So I remember actually doing an interview with Maresca towards the end of last season when he was at Leicester still, and he said he'd been really surprised by the managers, how good they were in the Championship, and how tactically aware they were. I mean, I know obviously you've managed in there a lot, Gary. I don't not mean it's disrespectful at all, but he was saying that they were just as good as the Premier League. Like the guy at Sheffield Wednesday, I think they played them in a game, and the guy at Sheffield Wednesday, Danny, made a change at half time. And Maresca said second half, we'd absolutely run the game first half. He made one tactical change second half, and we really struggled. And he says they were second bottom at the time. So it just shows you the Championship now is, as always, it's just a great league, isn't it?
We found last season, I think last season in particular, at the start of the season, and obviously we had a tough time at the start of the season for different reasons at Millwall, but I felt the league was a different league. I felt the league had really evolved where probably, every season before that you maybe had, there was a spell where you had Brentford, who were a possession-based team.
Yeah.
And you had maybe Norwich, who were a possession-based team. And you maybe had a couple of others who tried it. And all the others were very different. Last season, for the first season for a long time, it felt like every game was a Premier League style game.
Yeah.
Slow build up, possession-based, a lot of movement. And there's obviously a lot of continental influence on the bench as well. So I think, not just, but the domestic coaches, I think it's definitely improved. And I say it's definitely improved. What I would say is I haven't actually enjoyed watching the football as much.
So technical.
Because it's so technical. I think a lot of people will say that, won't they? Like, I watch Man City and some of the games I watch them because they're so dominant and everything's so methodical that sometimes actually I'm not as keen to watch it, even though I admire it. Whereas
that's my thing with Grealish. I mean, I love Grealish as a player, but I much preferred him at Villa, off the cuff. Pep's the best in the world, probably the best ever. But I just think what he's done for Grealish, he's obviously made him a better rounded player, but he's nowhere near as good to watch as he was at Villa.
No, and he's probably too good, Pep, isn't he? He's probably too good because the games are so controlled and so into control. But you watch a game occasionally and it's just a end-to-end open game. And sometimes you watch those games, you go, wow, this is brilliant. You know what I mean? Because just from an entertainment, you want a bit of chaos. Football is a chaotic game, isn't it? And, I think that it should be, and we're entering into a period where a lot of the games are quite similar, but it's just different, isn't it? And just as enjoyable.
I think you described it interestingly there, Gary, where you're saying, yes, it's entertainment, but not all entertainment is exciting, is it? Like you go and watch an opera and it's entertainment, but you can go and watch a rock concert and you can get excited while being entertained. And I think that's possibly what we're starting to see across some of the leagues now, where, yes, teams are possession-based and they're keeping the ball for long periods, and teams will talk about, progressive football and how they want to play. But what gets people on the edge of their seats sometimes is that level of excitement where it is unpredictable and chaos and dramatic and off the cuff and aggressive, as opposed to, we've completed 700-800 passes through a game, and we won 1-0 with an XG of like 0.3.
Are the directors now looking at that, Dave? That's my thing. Are the directors now looking at those stats and saying, we lost 3-0, but my word, look at our XG. We're getting better all the time. You've got to win games at the end of the day, haven't you?
It's a balance. It's a balance, isn't it, all the time?
Well, you see it it's now in the social media space. Those kind of whatever you want to call them, amateur journalists or social media kind of styled experts who've come out of the woodwork. They've got access to all the stats, and now they can create their own following and their own form of journalism, I suppose, in a way, John. Does that become not a threat to you necessarily, but does that become a threat to your more traditional type of journalist, where essentially each club now might have their own analyst or somebody who's delving deep and is in the know, to kind of use the phrase, that becomes a threat in some ways to the
I'm not sure about
to
a
the
threat.
role, you know.
There's definitely a market for it. There are sections of some supporters who are absolutely fascinated with that stuff. But I just think, hopefully, for me, it will always go back to transfers and what people want to know. But I think there's definitely a side for it, without a doubt. I mean, there's a lot of accounts that are really good and built such a cult following, and it's you can't discount this sort of things because it's the way the game's going now.
So when you talk, John, when you talked about relationships and how important your job is, building relationships with clubs, have you ever, I mean, I'm sure you have, but like, could you give us an example of have you fell out with a club or a person that, just on the back of a story that maybe you've repaired that relationship, but I suppose that's always the balance, isn't it? That someone might just take that little bit too far, or too personally, that story.
You've always got to make judgment calls and just think you've got to play the long game, so to speak. Little bits. I know it sounds horrible, but there's little things you hear. You just think, if I put that in, it won't go down very well. And
right,
but it might not do anything at the time, but later on it will. You've always got to make that call, that balance of, now I'll leave that out, or you include things as a favour sometimes. As long as it's accurate. Just to help people along the way, sort of thing. So. Yeah, it's all about judgment calls. It's it's like I said, it's not open heart surgery once again, but it's parts of the job where you have to think on your feet and very quickly as well.
And would you get? So you mentioned like agents. Would you get agents ringing you to try and get you to put stories out to? Because of course we know, the people want to enhance the value of their players, or they want to feel like 2 or 3 clubs are after. I know someone like yourself wouldn't.
I had that very early on when I was a freelance. I used to get that a lot, and because you're young, impressionable, gullible journalist, you put ex-players being targeted by Barcelona, and you fall for it at the time because you just think, oh, brilliant. Then you sort of siphon out the ones that are helping you out, or sometimes you hear things and you think that can't be right. I'll give you a story. The one story I've missed out that I always regret. I got a call saying that Andy Carroll was going to Liverpool from Newcastle. I remember at the time thinking, no chance. And I think now I would have handled that differently because I completely left it. And I think he signed like 2 days later. So you've just got to, just have your antennae switched on, really.
Over the years, John, as you've developed in your career, or maybe in the early stage, did you rely on mentors? Do you have a mentor? Is there someone who's kind of been a guiding light? Like, how do you, or do you just learn the trade by doing the trade and making the mistakes? Or
this is going to sound really like I've been set up to say this, but I must say, since I've been at the Telegraph since 2012, I have learned so much off my colleagues, and they've not got a gun to my head saying that. They have just been. They're a really good team of reporters, and they're all very supportive. We're all on a WhatsApp group. We're very close, and the likes of Sam Wallace, Matt Law, Jason Burt, Mike McGrath, Tom Morgan, Chris Bascom. All these names. Very experienced journalists, but they're good friends as well. And if you've got a problem or you're not sure about something, you call them, and there's no sort of like, there is a competitive edge, I'm sure, because there should be to any job, but there's very much a supportive side to that where we can bounce ideas off people, and they've got your back basically. But there's loads of people, isn't there? There's Paul Hayward used to work at the Telegraph. He was absolutely fantastic writer and a fantastic man. There's so many journalists who you learn off. Neil Moxley, Gary, you'll know him from time.
I'm gonna have to get him. On.
He held my hand very early on. He's a great journalist. But then there's loads around now. Like David Ornstein's fantastic news getter. There's people like that. You can't help but be inspired by your colleagues, straight rivals.
Well, it's interesting actually because again, Henry mentioned you and a few others, and I suppose you're in an industry like we are where you can still admire the work of other people, can't you? Doing the same job, you can still revere the way that someone else does it in a different way.
Yeah,
and I think I suppose there's still that camaraderie, isn't there? Even if you're working for different papers, is there a little bit of competition as well? Is there a little bit of competition?
Yeah. I mean, everyone wants to get the stories first. That's it. If you can get them right as well, then double whammy, isn't it?
Let's not go too far. Let's not go too far, John. Why'd you have to get them right?
Yeah, exactly. But no, there's always that. I mean, that's why you've got to be so quick nowadays. I mean, there was an instance this summer actually where I had a story and I had to write it obviously for our online, and that obviously takes time for them to put it together, put a picture on it, put a headline. And I think it was when Kieran McKenna signed his. He was going to stay at Ipswich, wasn't he? I think he turned down United or whatever. And I had the message. I was writing it ever so quickly, and it, just before our online people, they do it ever so quickly. I mean, I don't know how they do it. They get the story together, but then it just come out like a minute before, and you think, I had that one, but I can't really credit the guy who's beaten me because I did have it the same sort of time. But you are thinking, bloody hell, just if I a little bit more quicker. But those things happen. It's just you just have to roll with the punches sometimes.
Yeah, I suppose that competitive nature as well. It's working in sport. That sometimes everything's on the line, and you have to act now. I suppose it even goes back to those days where, you're there in the 93rd minute, and the goal goes in, and you've got to rewrite. But now it's how fast can you write really well, and still get the story of the game, But now it's got a completely different context, isn't it? So I suppose those the skills that you learn over the years. And do you see it pivoting at all? Is there like similar to we've talked about, John, in football, where the trends change of how people play the game? Is there trends changing in how people are reporting the game or reporting the stories?
Well, there's definitely a way how people are buying news now. I think you've noticed it, especially the Telegraph and the Athletic. It's now a subscription model, and I know there are lots of people on social media. You even see it now on our replies when we've done a story saying I'm not paying for that. But unfortunately now that is the way it's got to go. You would buy a newspaper for 40p a pound in the newspaper shop. It's just going to be the same, to pay for a monthly subscription for the Telegraph. And that's now how we are going to be judged on how many people subscribe to our work, how many people read it. All the sort of analyticals we've been talking about in football, we have people in the Telegraph office who will see how many people have read it, how many people have, subscribed off the back of it, how many people have actually paid money to read it. And then it goes even deeper into, have these people stayed? Have they just bought it for that, or have they stayed for another 3 months because they're interested in the product generally? But I mean, that's all changing now. But I think sooner or later, all the newspapers will have to operate some sort of subscription model to keep it all going.
Does that put more pressure on, John, to get more or to maintain the quality of your work, I suppose? Because like you say,
absolutely,
people aren't getting it for free anymore.
As well. Yeah. To find things different to write about as well, and interesting, and obviously exclusive interviews, and it's just going that extra yard to try and get stuff. I mean, I'm off to Spain tomorrow for 2 days with Nottingham Forest, and obviously I'm getting a couple of interviews out of there, and hopefully a sort of in-depth tactical piece on how they're going to work this season. And then obviously I think Leicester are going to be doing something. It's just basically trying to get things different to other people that makes your product worth getting.
I like the way 2 days for free in the sun. I like that one, mate. Have you tried to sell that? You tried to sell that. Tried to sell that to the Telegraph. I think if I could do a week, I think I can get some really good articles.
Never be allowed that, you. No chance.
It is amazing though on those camps now in those areas. Like you can go to the south of Spain now, and you can pick up like potentially 30 teams will be in that area now for a week. It's got to be a little honey trap of stories all available in one space.
Yeah, but then obviously you've got the problem of if you write something when you're over there with the club, have you betrayed them? So I mean, I do completely understand that. If they've welcomed you into the inner sanctum, and then you say, one of the players dropped a plate on the other lad's, broke his metatarsal, you're in trouble then, aren't you?
Yeah, don't go out of them. Don't go out of them on the Friday night at the end of the week. If that's any clubs actually do that. I mean, we found in football a lot of the times, as amazing a game it is, and we're all passionate about it, but it is 24/7. How do you find? Do you find it tough to find that balance? Or how do you find that balance with family life and trying to get to games and reporting? Like you said, reporting late into the night on a game. Is it hard to find that balance?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. You can't really switch off. And I was saying to Dave actually before we came on air that the amount of people who when the season ends that will come up to you and say, "Oh, you got 2 months now of doing nothing." And obviously, if I had a pound for that every time, I'd probably have about 20 quid or something. But it is incredible how it just never stops now, because it's things that are happening. Obviously, we had all the PSR stuff was going on. There's club takeovers, there's managers in trouble. Sorry, Gary. Obviously having to cover that subject.
Yeah.
And then obviously the transfer window. So you just don't feel like you're ever switching off. And yeah, I do have trouble sometimes switching off, just thinking, let's just have a day off and all that, because it's always on the days off when you'll get a message about something positive news-wise. You just think you can't leave it. So It's just how driven you want to be, really. How much of a life you want to have, really, I suppose.
Let's hope there's a few more managers struggling. Let's hope there's a few more managers struggling at the start of the season. I need a job first. So yeah,
it'd be October as usual, won't it? October, November. It's just a grim sort of existence for you guys, isn't it? Just waiting, really, isn't it?
I know. I'll give you a shout on which clubs to put a bit of pressure on the manager.
Please do.
Yeah, well, we're getting towards now starting the season, John. So does that come down to now you having to, get into a kind of match mode? Or do you have to switch from almost a pre-season transfer mode into then having to get ready to start reporting on matches again? Because I suppose
basically sort out the calendar ourselves for what games we're going to do. So I think it's obviously Sky now run the game. Once they've decided what games are going to be televised. Obviously speaking about balancing family life, it's obviously, like say if your partner's working on a Saturday, and a game in the Midlands has been moved to a Sunday, you'll try and move around that. So obviously, I think my games now I've sent to the office up until end of September, and obviously then you're just waiting for Sky to sort out the next ones, which is obviously, but in a way it's great because you do sometimes have a chance to have a Saturday off, and I actually, sad as it is, I like watching Sky, Gary, when you're on it. I like watching that old, the video printer and the reporters. I just think it's a great way of watching football. It is a great way of watching it, though.
Do you know what? When I was out of work, it's funny actually working on it now, because when I was out of work, I would sit there on a Saturday, and actually it's quite entertaining, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're brilliant. They're brilliant.
The way they do it is brilliant as well.
The show's incredible, and I think what's going to be interesting next year, if you look, it's ramped up again, hasn't it? So there's some. So I think there's some US coverage of the championship now. They've just signed a deal, haven't they?
There's 3 o'clock. Is that right?
Yeah, Sky are basically doing like Thursday, Fridays. I think if you look now, it goes almost every night. There's probably one of the league. I think there's more coverage of League Two and League One. I mean, for the football fan, it's incredible now. I mean, you could watch a game every
potatoes
night.
In heaven.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, it's brilliant. Brilliant.
And obviously the Champions League's going into Thursdays as well this season as well, I think, isn't it?
Oh, is that right? Oh, wow.
I think Champions League's going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. So, I mean, I suppose it gets the argument of is it too much? I mean, my wife would say definitely yes, it is.
All of our wives would say definitely yes.
Well, yeah, but the saturation, I mean, you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful a bit, haven't you, that it's not completely taking over.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
We've got the football calendars already busy, isn't it? So I think it's you, like us. You crave a little bit of space sometimes away from it. Where you even get, whether it's a few hours, a couple of days, and close season maybe a little bit longer, where you just you have to find a reset button. Otherwise, it's just saturation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it is a slog as well. As you know, it's 10 months of, as Gary will tell you, 24/7. And you're never comfortable. There's always a problem around the corner. Well, there is, isn't there? You can never relax. It's just one of those jobs, and it's the same in the journalism industry. Just when you think it's all gone quiet, some club will sack a manager out of nowhere, and you think, oh my God, here you go again. It's just, but we love it, don't we? We absolutely love it.
Oh, it was funny when you were talking about it earlier, actually, when you were talking about the, you get a story and then you think you can relax and then another story comes out. Yeah. It is very much like football management, isn't it? Because, you win a game, you can feel good usually for about an hour or two or an evening. And then the next day, something kicks, you walk into training and something's kicked off that you think, oh, for God's sake, like one of the players has been caught doing something, or you're thinking, oh my
Yeah.
God, I've got to deal with that now, or you're playing a Tuesday night and you lose, and then you're back to square one. And I suppose that's the thing with football, isn't it? In any part of the industry, because it's so fast moving and so quick to change, you can never relax, can you? No matter what you're doing, there's never a moment where you can feel good for a month.
I remember Gary towards the end at Millwall as well. I remember you saying that you really got a bit tired of how many interviews you had to do as well. I mean, and that's the amount you have to do after a game now is, I mean, maybe it's our fault, but that is incredible, isn't it? The amount.
I think you're right, because I think to give people context to it. So you come in, you literally will go into your office, chat to the staff for probably a minute after you've chatted to the players, and you've got the emotions of that, and then you go out and normally do the club media. Then you'll go and do the same interview more or less with Sky, slightly different interview with Sky. Then you'll do the radios. Then you'll go upstairs and do the written press. Yeah. And then what you normally do, this is interesting, but people don't see, you normally then come back down to the office and talk about the game, because often there's some of the directors in there. And this is the bit that makes me laugh the most, is normally I'll go home and, like, let's say my dad will go, oh, how was the game today? And in your head, you're thinking, I don't want to talk about it, honestly. So you have to go through the same thing about 7 or 8 times. Of course, we're all fortunate, but there does come a point where you think, I just want to sit down and I want to watch something I haven't got to think about, and I want a glass of wine and not think about football. And it is hard to escape, but then when you're out of work like I am, then you're out of work.
Tony Pulis, when he was at Stoke, he used to, he obviously lives down south, down in Dorset. He used to tell a story of how he'd drive down, so it's 3-4 hours drive, and he'd have his phone switched off, and he'd basically go into a room in his house, and his wife would bring his tea through, and that would be him. The lights would be off if he'd lost, and he'd just spend the day, spend the night in there, and just getting his me time. And I can completely understand, after that, especially if you've lost, you just want to be on your own, don't you?
And
have you ever said to your dad, Gary, just check the website?
No, but I have said to him a few times, Dad, give us a break. Like, just talk to me about anything other than that, So, which is fine. But ironically, when you win, it's like, what do you want to talk about? Yeah, brilliant.
How long you got?
3-0. Yeah, does anyone else want to ring me? So, I mean, it's just part.
We've had lots of those, to be fair.
Oh, goodness sake. What 3-0 losses?
If anyone's doing the metrics, we've had lots of wins. Yeah.
There you go. So, John, right. So, if it wasn't football, what would you cover? What sport would you cover? Or what industry would you cover? So you could be a journalist. Films. Okay. Yeah. Film critic. The modern day Barry Norman.
That's it. And why not?
I like it. So specifically what genre of films? Anything specific, or give us a few ideas
70s conspiracy movies.
Oh, mate.
Wow, okay.
There you go. You weren't expecting that one, were you?
Oh, we could do a whole new podcast.
But no, I've always been fascinated by film, I think. There's enough conspiracies in our jobs, isn't there? But no, that would probably be doing films or some sort of arts,
Right, okay. Interesting.
I like Melvin Bragg now, don't I?
I like it, mate. I like it.
Well, I suppose, it's the one thing about films. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and we were discussing about how everybody basically has an opinion about, every footballer that they've ever seen. They'll criticize and critique every game they go to watch. But you go and watch a concert, you go watch a film, nobody ever criticizes the artist on screen. They might say it's not a good film, but they wouldn't necessarily say it was badly acted or whatever, unless you're really, really, really knowledgeable about it.
Or your expert job. Yeah, exactly.
Which makes football quite interesting is that everyone thinks they can do Gary's job. To be fair, I think that sometimes I can do Gary's job.
You usually do my job. That's why I employ you so many times.
But it's an amazing as a sport and as an industry where basically anybody who's got zero experience of doing the job thinks that they could do the job, don't they? Go full circle back.
Really off in that blockbuster.
But there we go. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. That's been an hour spent with you, and it's been really enjoyable. And thanks for being so candid about all of your work. Hopefully you've enjoyed it.
No, it's been great. Thank you. I hope I've not landed myself in any trouble anyway.
We can get you out, but we can edit, mate. We've got
Thank you
David
very
great
much.
editing skills.
Cheers,
Top man,
chaps.
John.
Really enjoyed
Thanks,
it.
buddy. Thank you.
All the best for the
Bye-bye.
year. Cheers.
Thanks,
See ya.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.